Chapter 17. So far, the new medicine didn't cause nausea or muddy Eddie's thoughts too terribly, so he decided it was best to leave it alone. Unfortunately, leaving things alone was exactly what Lord Felix did not want to do. "It's fine, sweetheart," the god was saying as Eiji stared at him, horror-struck. "Hayato has others he can call. Julia, Theodora, Iovita, Thaddeus. There are plenty of them who are always willing to pitch in as needed. It's not the first time someone has stepped away for a few days." It was bad enough that after bringing his medicine, his master had also taken the time to go to the kitchens and fetch a bowl of broth, which now sat steaming in Eji's lap. It was worse that he brought word that Zenji was ordering Eiji away for a few days to recover. Worst of all was the prospect of Lord Felix taking a few days off from his own work for no other reason than to coddle his useless offering. "But, my lord, please, your servant is not worthy of such trouble," Eiji implored. Lord Felix gave him a look that he would almost have dared to call tender. "Of course you are. Now drink your broth." Eiji obeyed, but for once he wasn't happy about it. "This will please Hayato," the god said, as if he hadn't noticed Eji's gloom. "He's always after me to take more breaks, though I hardly know why." Lord Felix leaned forward in his chair and tilted his head so that he was looking into Eji's downturned face. Eiji hastily lowered his bowl and forced himself to meet his master's gaze. As soon as he did, the god smiled warmly at him. "I have nothing but time, dear. Why shouldn't I spend some of it on you?" Eiji dithered a moment longer than he should have, trapped in the sweetness of that gaze, before he managed to string together an appropriate response. "My lord is free to do as he wishes, of course. I would never presume to dictate my lord's actions." "I know you wouldn't," the god soothed. "Although perhaps I need somebody sensible like you to dictate that I shouldn't run off half-dressed." Eiji hid his smile in the bowl as he swallowed more broth. Lord Felix had been so flustered and chagrined when he returned with the medicine that it had been a struggle not to laugh. Of course, his urge to giggle had disappeared when the god had set to work cleaning up the traces of Eji's sickness. Lord Felix had cheerfully brushed off Eji's protests and offers to help, assuring him that he did this all the time and there was no need to be embarrassed. "How does your stomach feel?" his master asked now, pulling Eiji back to the present moment. "Do you think you'll be able to keep the broth down?" "Yes, my lord." Eiji was grateful to find that his stomach had settled. The god beamed. "Wonderful! Maybe later we can try something a little more solid." Eiji opened his mouth to make some polite reply, but what escaped was a yawn. He quickly stifled it behind his hand, mortified with himself, but Lord Felix was speaking before he could begin an apology. "The new medicine still makes you drowsy, I see. I don't think you should sleep in the chair anymore. You're too likely to lean on your bad shoulder. I could take you to your room if you don't mind me hovering around in your space, or if you'd be more comfortable without me coming in and out of your room, Eji's heart rate spiked at the words, and a panicky thrumming started in his ears. Lord Felix must have caught the look because he stopped himself. "Ah, of course. I promised I wouldn't force you to make any more decisions today, didn't I? All right. May I touch you?" That was such an easy decision, it hardly counted. Eiji was still nodding his assent when the god leaned down and picked him up, right out of the chair. This wasn't like the way Lord Felix had picked him up last night, ginger and arm's length, though his touch was still careful. Now Eji's good shoulder was pressed into the god's broad chest, and one strong arm was tucked under his knees while the other was wrapped gently around his ribs. Had Eiji ever been carried like this, even when he was a child? Not just held, but cradled? He couldn't remember it if he had. He wasn't a small man, but in this moment he felt small in the best possible way, supported and protected and almost treasured. It was foolish and improper, and he wouldn't have dared to even think the word if he hadn't been so tired, but there it was. He felt treasured. He was so lost in the feeling that he noticed neither the tears that had started to trickle slowly down his cheeks, nor the direction in which he was being carried. It was only when he felt an unfamiliar mattress under his back, far firmer than his own, that he realized he was being laid in Lord Felix's bed. "Is it soft enough?" the god asked anxiously. "I never could get the hang of soft beds. Are you comfortable?" Edgy's head spun and another tear slipped down his cheek. Please, my lord, I don't deserve—" "That's not what I wanted to know, sweetheart," Lord Felix interrupted. "I asked if you're comfortable." "Yes, my lord." "Wonderful. May I go into your room to get your things?" "Yes, my lord." "Thank you. I'll be right back." Back home in the temple, "I'll be right back" had always meant that the person would return in a few minutes. With Lord Felix, it meant that he would return in a few blinks of Edgy's eye, which he did now, his arms full of pillows and blankets. "I'm sorry my bed isn't very welcoming," the god said, setting his armload down on the foot of the bed and plucking out the pillows. "It was a long time before I had a cot of my own, and then it was just a cot, not a bed. I never had an actual bed until we came to live on the ship, and even though I've had so long to get used to soft mattresses and pillows, I just never have." Edgy mulled over the words as his master slid half a dozen pillows around him and under his back. Didn't they use beds in heaven? Surely if there were cots, there were also beds. Why hadn't Lord Felix had one? If Edgy understood correctly, he hadn't even had a cot to himself. What did that mean? It was true that even here the god's accommodations were sparse. His mattress was covered with only 2 thin sheets, between which Edgy assumed he slept, and, until Lord Felix had come in with his feathery bounty, the bed had boasted only one rather dispirited-looking pillow. It was so thin and lumpy that it seemed somehow sickly, an impression which was reinforced when Lord Felix pulled it away, and it shed 2 battered feathers. Edgy watched the feathers drift down to the floor. Lord Felix must have been following his gaze because he gave a slightly embarrassed laugh. "I know it's seen better days, but it's still too good to throw out," the god said. He sounded a little defensive, though Edgy hadn't said a word against the pillow. "No sense being wasteful. It's got a few years left in it." Edgy didn't think the pillow had a few minutes left in it, but he bit back the observation and merely bowed his head submissively. Lord Felix placed a few of the pillows under Edgy's shoulder to keep it raised, then moved onto his pile of blankets. He wrapped Edgy up in them with his brow furrowed in concentration, as if it were of vital importance that every loose bit of blanket be tucked under his offering's legs. At last the god straightened and smiled in satisfaction. "There!" Edgy felt like a caterpillar in a cocoon. He was wrapped so tightly that his legs looked like one long tube. But the constraint was strangely nice. Bound in his wrappings, Edgy felt as if, in a way, he was still being held. "How do you feel?" the god asked, and Edgy smiled up into his face before he could think better of the bold move. "It feels nice, my lord," he said, and Lord Felix grinned so wide that it looked like his face might break. "I'm going to get you some more food," the god said. "After that, would you mind if I brought my book in here with you?" Edgy blinked in surprise. "My lord, this is your room." "And your offering. Why did his master persist in his strange requests for Edgy's permission?" Edgy was still puzzling through this when the god returned with not just a bowl, but an entire tray. It was piled high with 2 pots, some bowls and cups, and a loaf of bread. "Do you feel like eating some soup?" Lord Felix asked. "These medicines can take some time to work their way out of your system, so it's probably best to keep to lighter foods for today." Edgy wished he could do something to drive the guilt from his master's voice. The god didn't need to explain anything to him. If Lord Felix wanted him to eat soup, he would eat soup. If Lord Felix wanted him to eat nothing, he would eat nothing, and he would question it no more than he questioned this. "I would like some soup very much," he assured the god. "Thank you for getting it. My lord is kinder than his servant deserves." "I disagree." Lord Felix looked up from the tray and gazed into his face. "You deserve every kindness and every good thing, Edgy." Blood rushed to Edgy's face. He squirmed a little and dropped his eyes to his blanket-wrapped lap, not daring to raise them until the god handed him the tray. The pots had been cleared away, and now it held the bread and a bowl of soup, both of which were so warm they steamed. The wonderful smells rising from the food made Edgy's mouth water, and it took only the slightest gesture of permission from his master for him to begin eating with gusto. It was hard to pace himself, but Edgy kept hold of his manners and didn't gobble the food like he wanted to do. Still, he didn't look up from his tray until he heard the clink of pottery. Lord Felix had set one of the pots on his bedside table. Edgy watched as the god opened a drawer under the same table and drew out a battered leather pouch. He carefully shook some of the contents onto his palm. Was that dirt? Edgy squinted to get a better look. As Lord Felix took the lid off the pot, allowing a surprising amount of steam to escape, and dropped his strange substance into it, Edgy saw that it wasn't dirt at all, but some kind of dried plant. Some sort of tea, then? Lord Felix hastily replaced the pot's lid and turned to look at Edgy. Tea, he confirmed, apparently noticing his offering's inquisitiveness. A favorite blend of mine. It'll be unfamiliar to you, but I hope you like it. I've been told it's wonderful for an unsettled stomach. He'd been told. Of course, the god couldn't drink tea himself, so why would he keep a pouch of it next to his bed? Edgy swallowed the insolent question along with another bite of soup, but once again Lord Felix seemed to be able to read his offering's mind. He smiled at Edgy. I can still smell it, even if I can't taste it, and I like to be able to offer tea to my human friends when they visit me. Rokuro and Zenji both love this blend, you know. Edgy did not know. Moreover, the thought of the kitchens and the men who would work there for the next few days without him made his stomach clench and his throat tighten, so he shoveled in another bite of soup and tried to drive the feeling from his body. Lord Felix chatted easily as Edgy finished his meal, talking about the strange plants from which the tea was made and the stranger country where they could be found. Finally, the leaves had been seeped to the god's satisfaction. He removed Edgy's empty dishes and handed him a steaming cup of tea. The cup was pleasantly smooth and hard between Edgy's palms, and he simply held it for a moment and breathed in the rich scent. It was sweet and a little sharp. Edgy liked the smell, and he didn't seem to be alone in that. Lord Felix hovered next to the bed and inhaled deeply as well, his eyes closed in what appeared to be rapture. Edgy liked to see that expression on his master's face. In his simple happiness, Lord Felix looked young and almost innocent. The lines of concentration that usually furrowed his brow were smoothed away, and his lips tilted up in a smile that didn't seem calculated to integrate or reassure. Had Edgy ever seen the god smile for no one's benefit but his own before? Edgy had noticed that Lord Felix was handsome the first moment he laid eyes on him, but he'd forgotten that as soon as he realized what he was. For the gods, beauty was besides the point. Appearances only mattered for the likes of Edgy, who needed to be pleasing and had so little else to offer. Beauty was simply one more thing he owed his master, and he would certainly never have dared to assess Lord Felix the way he assessed himself in the mirror. But surely it wasn't disrespectful if he didn't assess, only admired? Disrespectful or not, he couldn't help it. Lord Felix was startlingly beautiful in his unself-conscious enjoyment, and Edgy took advantage of his closed eyes to drink in every one of the god's features in a way he wouldn't ordinarily dare to do. His enormous hands, beautiful because Edgy knew how gently they touched and held. His broad shoulders, for once relaxed and unhunched. His surprisingly long, thick lashes resting so softly on his cheeks. His generous lips, which had pressed so tenderly against Edgy's own. The arousal that swept Edgy's body was different from anything he had ever imagined before. From the first day, he had imagined how it would feel to serve Lord Felix sexually. He had imagined clinging to powerful shoulders and submitting himself to the overwhelming might that his master held so carefully in check. Now, for the first time, he imagined lying in the god's arms afterwards and seeing him smile like this. He imagined some bolder version of himself who would dare to press kisses to that suddenly bewitching bit of softness at the corner of Lord Felix's jaw and play with the god's always neat hair. He imagined the dazzled look Lord Felix got when Eiji smiled at him, and wondered how it would look close up if he was pressed against his master's chest. The desire that these images evoked was strange. It sent a pang through him, tenderness so deep it was painful. It made his throat squeeze and his eyes burn, and Eiji tore his gaze away from Lord Felix's face and tried to force his confusion down, along with the first experimental swallow of the tea. The faint sound of his sipping must have pulled Lord Felix out of whatever reverie he'd been in, because he was speaking almost as soon as Eiji swallowed. "Well, what do you think?" Though excited, his voice was as soft and controlled as usual. Eiji realized that he'd expected, and perhaps hoped, to hear his natural loud tones after seeing him so relaxed. Eiji kept his gaze shyly fixed on the cup in his hands. "It's good, my lord." In truth, he was so shaken by all the strange thoughts and feelings rioting through him that he had barely tasted the tea. Eiji drank again and found that the tea was indeed good. He was about to take a third sip when the mattress shifted next to him. Lord Felix had perched himself on the other side of the bed with a thick book in his hands. He watched Eji's face closely as he shifted his legs onto the mattress. "There's nowhere else to sit in here," the god said. "Do you mind?" Eiji stumbled over his words, though he'd recited these exact ones so many times that his master must be getting sick of hearing them. "My lord may do as he wishes, of course." "All right." Lord Felix settled into the bed, leaving several inches of space between them. "But I'll warn you that you may come to regret that kind offer. What I wish is to fuss over you in the most ridiculous way. You'll be sick of me and begging to go back to the kitchens within a day." "I won't." The words tore out of Eji's mouth without his conscious permission, and he didn't know whether it was due to the lingering drugs or the strange madness that the god's face and voice had awakened in him. My lord's presence is very comforting, and I'm grateful that you would waste your time with me like this." Eiji clamped his teeth shut to stop any more surprise statements from popping out of his traitorous mouth. His face burned in embarrassment. After only an instant's hesitation, Lord Felix shifted closer to him, until only a sliver of mattress separated them. Eiji was expecting the soft, "May I touch you?" but he could not have anticipated how good the gentle fingers would feel as they tilted his chin up from where he'd tucked it against his chest. "Oh, my sweet Eiji." The words were kind, and the tone was kinder, but neither could compare to the tenderness Eiji found in the soft brown eyes fixed so wholeheartedly on his own. "I've lived a long time, and I've wasted heartbreaking amounts of time. Being with you is the opposite of that. Every moment I've spent with you has been a privilege and a joy. You're wonderful, and I'm lucky to be sitting here beside you." Eiji was too tired and achy and confused to argue. He didn't even have the energy to resist or overthink the words in his own mind. His tears were silent, and when Lord Felix gently drew Eji's head down to rest against his shoulder, all he could feel was safety and gratitude and a strange relief. He slipped into sleep that way, and it was the deepest, sweetest sleep he could remember.